And if you look at the senior ranks now in the Russian military, an awful lot of them have cycled through Syria to get that experience. I think if you look at it, the Russians today hold one of the world's two largest nuclear arsenals. Obviously, in conventional terms, they field far smaller forces than during the Soviet era, but especially given the investments and developments over the past decade, they're a far more capable force than they were in 2010. Well, I think if you look at how the Russians have used their military basically since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the initial efforts and the engagements in Chechnya didn't go very well at all. Georgia, they won, obviously. You wouldn't have expected them to lose against such a small country, but again, the performance wasn't really what they expected. And I think that was the spark that basically pushed them into the whole modernization program. Has that worked for them? Pretty much so, yes. And I think if you look at how the annexation of Crimea went, obviously everything was in their favour there, but it went well. Syrian intervention, they seem to have kind of rescued the Assad regime, and they've benefited hugely in terms of the experience they've gained from that. They've got to try a whole range of new weapons, and they've got a whole lots of young personnel have gone through and actually got combat experience. Well, I think air power, they brought air power to the table in a way that the Assad regime couldn't do. They bought some new kit. They used a range of long-range cruise missiles that they've been developing and wanted to test. The Syrian intervention allowed them to do that. Lots of air crew, lots of ground crew going through Hmeimim, getting a whole range of experience. And if you look at the senior ranks now in the Russian military, an awful lot of them have cycled through Syria to get that experience. I think Russia will be pretty keen not to get physically involved, as it were, simply because it's still involved in Syria. It's got some other issues it wants to deal with, and also these things at the end of the day cost money. Your economy is not in a good place at the moment because of the COVID pandemic. You're still having to pay for the Syrian intervention. Ideally, you don't want to get involved in anything else. That said, it's obviously a concern for Moscow, and they'll be really keen to see this situation resolved in a peaceful manner, but in a way which suits their interests. I mean, the Russia-China relationship is fascinating. I mean, if you look at it in historical terms, go back to the 1990s, when Russia is just desperate to generate sales, to generate hard currency, and it presents China with the opportunity to basically go shopping for a whole range of Russian capabilities that it previously wouldn't have had access to. China, over the past 25, 30 years, has invested an enormous amount in defence technology, and in many ways is now ahead of where the Russians are. So the technology flow in the 1990s was from Russia to China. There's a question for me whether in some key areas, if that kind of strategic alliance of convenience, if you like, carries on, well, some technologies are going to start to flow in the other direction. Whether China will be able to say to the Russians, look, you need this, you need that, struggle with this technology, we've mastered it, why don't we buy in, why don't we co-develop? We've seen kind of some indications of that in the commercial aviation sector. There's been a long-term lot of talk about heavy lift helicopter co-development. Reasonably kind of, these are things that are reasonably easy to do together. When you get onto the harder side of weapons development, that asks much more difficult political questions. But some of the technologies that the Chinese have now got, the Russians are lagging in. And it will be very interesting to see if that relationship develops in that way.